I'm Dr. Lauren Ministero, and today I'll be talking about some research that I conducted with my colleagues at the University at Buffalo while I was a graduate student. Today I'll be talking about mindfulness, and specifically how, even though mindfulness has a lot of positive outcomes for people individually, it might have some negative outcomes for how people approach their social lives or how they deal with others. The way that I define mindfulness as a researcher is in line with the way that Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn thinks about mindfulness, which he's really popularized in the West as a psychologist. And he thinks about mindfulness as present moment attention and awareness that you engage in that is non-judgmental. So I started becoming interested in the topic of mindfulness during graduate school, when I started thinking about how mindfulness might influence compassion and how people think about pro-social behaviors, or how we think about giving or being generous to others. Yeah, so there's a number of ways that people study mindfulness in science. One way is to actually induce mindfulness by having people engage in a short mindfulness induction in the lab. So this can be kind of fun and interesting, where people can think about kind of doing a guided meditation. So you're either sitting and thinking about focusing on your breath, allowing your thoughts to pass by as though they're things that you're unattached to, where you're not labeling them, you're not trying to eliminate them, and you're just letting them float by. There are other ways as well, such as focusing on body sensations or engaging in what's called a body scan, where you're thinking about feeling all of the sensations that occur in your body progressively, maybe from head to toe. In the psychology research, it's usually a 6 or 8 week period, but in real life, we're finding that it's all over the place. So people are using apps to learn mindfulness over the longer term. People are enrolling in programs where they're doing mindfulness programs for 6 months or more, or even a lifetime. So there's a lot of interesting research that indicates that mindfulness is positive for people in their day-to-day lives. Maybe they have increased mood or they feel better on an individual level. And then the research on mindfulness and pro-social behavior tends to be more mixed. So some research on mindfulness and pro-social behavior indicates that it makes people more generous and loving and giving, and other research seems to not find an effect. And what we were finding in our research is that there are some instances where mindfulness can actually make people more selfish.
Oh, wow. How would you measure the selfishness?
So the way that we are looking at selfishness as an outcome or a lack of pro-social behavior in our mindfulness research is by asking people to engage in a short mindfulness intervention, and then some people engage in something that's more of a control. So maybe they're mind wandering or doing something else that isn't particularly mindful. So an active control. And then we give people the opportunity in the lab to actually help others. So do something like stuff envelopes to solicit donations for an important cause. What we're finding in our research is that mindfulness may predict different outcomes, or it may predict nothing at all, but there's important moderators of this effect. So the important moderator that we're really focused on is the idea of human independence versus interdependence. And when people tend to be more independent versus interdependent, they think more about themselves and their own outcomes versus thinking of themselves in terms of their community or others that they engage with. So in the lab, what we're finding is that when people tend to be more independent versus interdependent, they're less likely to be willing to stuff envelopes or engage in other behaviors on behalf of others. So on the topic of independence versus interdependence, people in the West, such as Americans, tend to be more independent, whereas people in Eastern cultures, where mindfulness practices actually originate, tend to be more interdependent. So we think that some of the reason that we're finding these effects is because mindfulness practices in the West are really taken out of context. We think that in general, what might be happening with mindfulness practices, mindfulness training, is that it's really putting a spotlight on the dominant values and goals that people have. So when people tend to be more independent in the West, mindfulness may make people more selfish because people tend to have more self-oriented goals. So one story about mindfulness that me and my co-authors find particularly fascinating is a story from Buddhist monk and philosopher Matthieu Ricard. He talks about mindfulness as a means of awareness that makes people very focused on whatever their goal might be. So that is to say, it doesn't really matter what your goal is. It could be magnified even if it's not particularly pro-social. So that could be someone, as he describes, who is a sniper or someone who is doing other potentially non-pro-social behaviors. Yeah, so one joke that we like, me and my co-authors, is what did the Buddhist monk order at the hot dog stand?
What?
I'll take one with everything.